Let me start by saying that I've actually never played the original Last of Us game. I did have the remaster because it came with my PlayStation Plus membership, but I knew that the remake was on the way, and so I decided to wait. Honestly, I'm glad I did because this is definitely the definitive version of this game. Basically, what it seems like they've done is taken the original Last of Us, threw it into the game engine of Part 2, rebuilt everything so that it all worked correctly in the new game engine, and called it a day. The thing is, obviously the story still holds up today as being one of the greatest in gaming, which we'll talk about momentarily. Visually, the graphics are insane. Like, this is a good ass looking game, dude, seriously. The funny thing is that the gameplay is the one thing that feels a bit dated, but we'll talk about that later. So this might actually seem strange, but I actually played The Last of Us Part 2 without playing Part 1. The gameplay just looked so fun to me in Part 2, and that was the main reason why I played it. I thought to myself that if I end up enjoying Part 2, maybe that'll inspire me to play through Part 1. On top of that, I actually loved the story in Part 2. I'm not trolling either. I genuinely found the story in Part 2 was great. I know I'm probably the only person who feels this way though, but I'm not trying to start a debate between oh, do you guys think that the plot of Part 2 was great or not or anything like that. Most of all, I just wanted to set the stage for my playthrough of Part 1. Because when most people talk about Part 2, it's them drawing comparisons and saying how Part 1 was just so much stronger with the writing. And so with how heavily people criticized Part 2, I went into Part 1 with high expectations, and the story did not disappoint. The story is just so tightly polished with some of the best character writing I've seen in a video game. And anytime there might be some goof or something that I would be like, nah, a little bit overcritical about, I would just think to myself, dude, this game came out in 2013, and that is just insane. The funny thing is that I think my favorite part about the writing is what's not said.
I mean, we've come this far. Let's just finish it.
Do I need to remind you what is out there?
I get it.
The Last of Us Part 1 manages to convey heavy emotions without having the characters constantly berate the player by explaining, this is why I feel this way over and over. I also love Joel. I can't believe how violent and aggressive he is. I never got to see Joel because in Part 2, you know.
Please don't shoot. Joel, please get up.
So I didn't really know what all the hype was about with Joel, and I gotta say it was extremely refreshing playing as a character that I could relate to so well. I found that he would react to situations almost exactly the same way that I wanted him to react to.
I ain't a big fan of these odds.
We can sneak by them, even though I know that's not your style.
Hey man, come on, pop your head out. Come on, do it. Ah, beautiful. And after playing through the entirety of the story, I gotta say Joel might be one of my favorite characters in video games. He's that well written. The funny thing is though that I know it might sound crazy, but playing through the original actually made me appreciate the second game more. See, while Joel and Ellie's relationship defined the first game, I feel that Joel's absence also defined the second game. The only thing that I feel is a bit lacking with The Last of Us Remake is the gameplay. Okay, let's talk about the combat. So myself and a lot of players were hoping to see gameplay mechanics from the second game, like being able to go prone or doing the quick counter move. We were expecting to see that in Part 1. Unfortunately, none of that is here, and when you end up watching any of the videos over on the PlayStation YouTube channel, a lot of times it kind of feels like the developers were making excuses not to implement that into the game because of the fact that it would have been so much more work.
Why didn't we retrofit dodge into The Last of Us since we had it in The Last of Us Part 2? If you're facing a clicker in The Last of Us Part 1, you really need to keep your distance from that clicker because if it grabs you, it's going to kill you. I think we found a great balance for that in The Last of Us Part 2 playing as Ellie, but it just felt wrong for Joel.
That's right, Joel can't dodge because it felt wrong. As far as I can tell, all they really did with this game, and I don't mean to say this in a way that undermines the amount of work that the developers clearly did, but it feels like they took Part 1, plopped it into the game engine of Part 2, spruced up the graphics, and called it a day. So while the story holds up and the graphics are insane, the combat definitely feels like an old PS3 game. Sometimes. So let me see if I can explain this in a way that makes sense. I feel like a lot of the combat sequences was the developers would just take a bunch of enemies, throw them into a combat sequence without refining their AI. So many of the fights would play out the exact same way because the enemies seem to only have one solution to any problem, which was flank. Seriously, every time you would get into a fight, you'd have one enemy trying to flank you while the others would be staying behind cover. Doesn't matter if you just killed 20 guys in the exact same way, one after another, they're gonna just keep mindlessly running up beside you. It was pretty cool at first, but as I got further in the game, I found it made every fight a lot more trivial.
Hey, get him!
All right, well, the battle is on. All right, let's just use our normal pistol. All I can really do is go for body shots. I'm not good enough to hit him in the head. Got him. And eventually what I would do for most combat sequences is I would go into a room, back into a corner, shoot so all the enemies were alerted to my presence, and then I would just wait for them to try to flank me and just dispatch them accordingly. Now, when you compare this to the second game, yes, the enemies are able to flank you in part 2. But that's just one of many options that the AI will end up picking from to deal with a certain situation because the enemies are designed to be able to take advantage of the environment that they've been put into. What? Oh, there's some behind me. Yeah, of course. Because that's all this game does. How do we step their AI up? Just make them flank 24/7. Like, there was very rarely any instance in the remake where an enemy would specifically stay at a choke point or anything like that. Like, they would always compromise their position to flank. The funny thing too is I even had one of these combat sequences where one of the dudes was like, "We'll stay here, wait for him to come to us." And right as he was saying that, one of the enemies proceeded to flank me.
Stay put. Let him come to us.
Ow! Ow! With all that said, I still found the combat to be a lot of fun. It's just that because this was supposed to be a remake that was in Part 2's game engine, I was a bit disappointed to see that they didn't end up making the combat just as good as the sequel. Now, I know it might seem like I'm complaining a lot about this, but I mostly just wanted to draw attention to it because I feel like it's the one issue that I have with the game overall. I think that The Last of Us Part 1 is an incredible game, and I would definitely rate it a 4 out of 5. Now, at the end of it all, this game cost me $100 because it's a PS5 exclusive game, which means that it's more expensive than usual. And on top of that, I'm also Canadian, which means that I get charged a lot of taxes when I buy these games digitally. Ultimately, I ended up getting through the campaign in maybe 10 hours, and I still haven't done the DLC at the moment that I'm recording this audio. But do I think that it was worth it? Yeah, I do, because you end up unlocking New Game Plus and you can actually just give yourself like infinite ammo and a bunch of other fun things for your second playthrough, which I really enjoy when games have stuff like that. And I mean, let's face it, when a game like Stray charges $30 for 4 hours, I think $100 for 10 hours seems pretty fair. Oh, that's so goddamn cool!